I don't begrudge anyone who'd take on the task of telling jokes through video games. To avoid dissecting the frog, humour manifests from contradictions with our expectations, like an obvious setup and unexpected punchline. This conflicts with video games that are, for all intents and purposes, rigid and familiar systems. We push a button and expect the same result each time. This isn't to say the games can't be funny, because often they are, even when they're trying hard not to be. One of the funniest games of the past few years was Naughty Dog's The Last of Us Part 2. Not for any of the included writing, but instead because my friend kept throwing character models down the stairs and shooting their reactions in photo mode, disrupting serious scenes of revenge with Ellie and Joel crashing through furniture. Then there's the unexpected results of procedural systems like ragdolls, explosives, and wonky artificial intelligence leading to laughs. These have led to a cottage industry of comedy games like Goat Simulator, Happy Wheels, and Octodad, where the humour comes from wobbly characters bumbling through recognisable situations. But games as a vehicle for well-written jokes are few and far between, mostly because humour isn't a universal constant, and the repetitive and player-led nature of games can dull and often ruin the delivery of punchlines. Great joke games, like great jokes, are best told once in the right situation, like the insult joust of Monkey Island, and not like the assault of meme humour in games of the late aughts. Dissecting Frogs was at the forefront of my mind playing Panic and Cold Supper's latest release, Thank Goodness You're Here, a point-and-slap adventure game set in the fictional town of Barnsworth, situated somewhere in County Yorkshire. The title sums up how the player character finds themselves thrust into helping strange citizens with their peculiar problems, such as finding grease to remove an arm from a grating, milk for a cup of tea, or preparing a tray of fish smoking ciggies. It's a playable sketch show where you interact either passively or actively with bulging stereotypes, and soak in the minute details of a small working-class town. Like the best comedy games, you're responsible for Thank Goodness's funniest moments, and because I'm no joke thief, I'll leave you to discover the best of them. I had a smile on my face throughout, and although I never laughed out loud, there are going to be comedic beats I'll be thinking of for a while. I can imagine if you're watching this from the Everglades or United Arab Emirates, you might not find much of Thank Goodness You're Here's humour funny outside of completely off-the-wall moments. But humour is subjective, in this case playing better to an audience broadly like Cold Supper's developers. I vibed with Thank Goodness You're Here almost immediately, and not just because I've grown up in and near towns like Barnsworth. Its style of humour reminded me of classic British comedies like The Farce Show, where no gag hangs around, the strange flights of fancy of The Mighty Boosh, even the small-town horror of The League of Gentlemen. All the while, Goodness's very modern cartoon stylings juxtapose in funny ways with its writing's northern soul. It's a surprise that indie publisher Panic funded a game a decimal of the world's inhabitants are going to enjoy, but I implored them for doing so, because those that do will love it. This got me to consider a more interesting aspect of Thank Goodness You're Here as a comedy game. The best jokes are told once in the right situation, and that conflicts with how games now need to target the broadest possible audience and be played every day to satisfy shareholders. Titles like Fall Guys have added some levity to live service games through wobbly ragdolls, but that same approach wouldn't work with doing the same stand-up set every single day. Fortunately, Thank Goodness is a one-and-done experience, and is about as short as a feature-length comedy at around 2 hours, unless a player attempts every quest in town. Its gameplay is also kept relatively streamlined. I'd describe it as Night in the Woods in the north, but it might be even simpler than that, featuring no minigames and presented as a side-scrolling simplified adventure. It's an interactive delivery system for visual gags, written jokes, and the timeless comedy of thick Yorkshire accents.
Thank goodness you're here, man. This store's a madness.
And so complex game systems are stripped out, so not to get in the way. Where other so-called comedy games have struggled to balance length and laughs, Thank Goodness is more concerned with the latter, and all I can say is thank goodness for that. It didn't outstay its welcome, and although some jokes are repeated for comical escalation, there's never the need to replay or retake sections for better odds. It succeeds as a better video game comedy than other more recent attempts as a result, feeling like a nice modernization of older adventure games with smart comedic writing. For its price point, most gamers won't feel as if they got their money's worth. As an enlightened big brain games writer with disposable income from YouTube thumbnails, I was happy to spend about as much as $8 Domino's pizza on a comedy experience that was tuned exactly on my wavelength. That price to play ratio is always going to be a factor into a game purchase, but cost rarely if ever affects good joke telling in other mediums. Those 3 UK comedies I mentioned were all produced by the BBC, the corporation paid by a UK arts tax to fund radio, film and television for all parts of the UK, not just the major population areas. In that respect, Thank Goodness You're Here feels like a game that could have only existed from a country with a public service broadcaster. Although it has touchstones of beloved comedies, a bottom line of appealing to everyone wasn't at the forefront of Cole Supper's mind, because if it was, they never would have made a comedy game like Thank Goodness You're Here. It isn't for everyone, and that's for the best, because its uncompromising humour is funnier than recycled internet memes could ever be. To me, Thank Goodness You're Here teases a perfect world where the BBC could use some of its public fund to invest in the British games industry and independent creators, so we could get more one-off, short but sweet games exactly like Thank Goodness You're Here, made by developers from across the country to represent their own British values. Uncompromised by having to appeal to advertisers or big business, developers get the allowance to tell the best kind of jokes, short, sweet and to the point. And no gamers feel ripped off because it's the same tax that pays for Planet Earth, Radio 1 and EastEnders. Thank Goodness You're Here is what independents excel at, telling stories and jokes that big publishers would find too niche to be profitable. As one of the few games that is a genuine delivery system for jokes, hopefully its success may get other budding comedians to appear on Steam. But in the spirit of humour coming out of the incongruous, I would absolutely love to see the reaction of a Monster Energy swigging, banned from Twitch, edgelord Yank to Thank Goodness You're Here. Would its jokes transcend language barriers? Would they see something of their own life in the cartoon depictions of everyday working people? Or instead, would they crack their own jokes on top of it? After all, sometimes humour doesn't come naturally out of games, but instead when we break and bend them to do unexpected things.